They had boarded like anyone else, quietly, with smiles. Two elderly passengers holding hands, looking forward to a first-class anniversary flight, just a peaceful trip to Paris. He helped her with her coat. She rested her head on his shoulder. And then, something changed. A flight attendant leaned in, her tone flat. "We'll need you to switch seats." No apology, no explanation, just an order. Another couple, young, white, dressed like they owned the airline, stood nearby, watching. He politely declined. Once. Then again, the smiles disappeared. Suddenly, the mood shifted. Words like non-compliant and disruptive started echoing down the aisle. Security boarded, passengers pulled out phones, and just like that, he was yanked from his seat. She screamed his name as they took him. 10 minutes later, she slumped over, unresponsive. Protest signs outside an airport, news anchors with serious faces, a trending hashtag crawling across the screen, a tear-streaked man gripping his wife's wedding ring. It was all over the news by morning. But this wasn't about headlines. This was about something deeper, something that had been happening quietly for far too long. And when he made one call, just one, the ripple didn't stop with the airline. It hit the courtroom, the boardroom, and every seat in every plane across the country. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more real human stories like this. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We see you. We appreciate you. Because what happened next, no one was ready for. Desmond Wilson wasn't just respected in his field. He was the type of doctor whose patients sent him Christmas cards every year. A black cardiologist with over 3 decades of practice in Chicago, he had worked his way up from a scholarship student in Mississippi to the chief of surgery at one of the most recognized hospitals in the Midwest. But beneath all the accolades, Desmond was a man of routine, devotion, and quiet strength. His wife, Eleanor, had been by his side since med school. They'd met in the campus library and had been inseparable ever since. She had given up her dream of becoming a teacher so he could pursue his career, and never once complained. This trip wasn't just another vacation, it was their 40th wedding anniversary, a moment they had talked about for years. Desmond had spared no detail. First-class seats, private car service, 5-star hotel in Paris. Everything Eleanor loved. He even surprised her with a new necklace just before they left for the airport. As they rode to O'Hare that afternoon, she leaned over and whispered, "You always do too much." And he smiled, replying, "You've earned too much." At the terminal, everything seemed normal at first. The agents scanned their boarding passes and glanced at their IDs, then paused. Her eyes moved back and forth. Desmond saw it, that quick flicker of disbelief, like the idea of 2 older black folks flying first class just didn't register. Still, they boarded without issue. Eleanor settled into the window seat, beaming, while Desmond tucked their passports into the seat pocket. A flight attendant passed, gave them a once-over, and kept moving. Another one followed shortly after and did the same. It felt off, like they weren't supposed to be there. But they'd dealt with this kind of thing before. Subtle, coded discomfort dressed in smiles and corporate uniforms. 15 minutes passed. A white couple walked onto the plane, much younger, dressed like they were headed to Cannes, not Paris. They exchanged a few words with the crew at the front, then one of the attendants approached Desmond and Eleanor. "Sir, we're going to need you and your wife to change seats. There's been an adjustment." Desmond looked up. "An adjustment?" "Yes, these seats are needed for a couple with special accommodations." Eleanor blinked in confusion. "We paid for these, in full." The attendant's smile thinned. "I understand, but this isn't up for discussion." Desmond stayed calm. Decades in medicine had taught him to speak with facts, not emotion. Unless the aircraft is going down, we're not moving. The crew exchanged glances. One pulled out a radio. What Desmond didn't know then, what he couldn't have known, was that their refusal would trigger a chain of decisions that would leave his wife fighting for her life, and himself at the center of a story that would expose something far bigger than 2 stolen seats. The tension on board had started low, like the hum of a misfiring engine, easily ignored at first. But it didn't stay that way. Desmond adjusted his watch as the flight crew moved about the cabin, whispering behind clipped smiles. Eleanor sipped orange juice, looking out the window. The other passengers around them seemed to sense the change too. how the crew's eyes kept darting toward row 1 as if waiting for something to snap. Then came the second visit. This time, the lead attendant brought a supervisor. "Sir, we need to ask you one more time to relocate to another seat." No apology, no proper explanation. Just a quiet but unmistakable pressure behind the words. Desmond stood his ground. "We're in the seats we paid for. My wife isn't in the best of health, and we're not moving. Please stop asking." The supervisor's face hardened. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have to involve airport security." A nearby passenger turned to watch, wide-eyed. Another subtly began recording with their phone. The murmurs began to spread across the cabin, but the crew didn't back down. Eleanor placed a hand on Desmond's arm. "Please, don't get upset. It's our anniversary," she whispered, her voice trembling. Desmond looked into her eyes, tired, kind, and already weary from a lifetime of navigating rooms where they were always expected to smile, shrink, or shift. He squeezed her hand. "I'm calm, I promise." Minutes later, 2 uniformed security officers boarded the plane. "Sir, we need you to come with us." "On what grounds?" "You've been deemed non-compliant and a disruption to flight operations." Eleanor gasped. "This is absurd. He's done nothing wrong." But they didn't respond to her. They reached for Desmond. He raised both hands. "There's no need to touch me. I can walk." He stood up slowly, as if performing for the cameras he now knew were watching. His jacket hung neatly over his arm, his passport still in the seat pocket. As he turned to leave, Eleanor started coughing, her hand gripping the seat in front of her. Then she collapsed. Her body slumped forward, and passengers screamed. A flight attendant rushed in too late. Desmond spun around, breaking free of the officer's grip. "She's not breathing. Call for help." The cabin descended into chaos. An off-duty nurse jumped in. A defibrillator was pulled from its case. The white couple the crew had tried to accommodate stood frozen, now unsure of what they'd just stepped into. The pilot announced an emergency delay. Paramedics stormed the plane, cutting Eleanor's blouse as they tried to resuscitate her. Desmond was now on his knees, holding her hand, praying under his breath. "Stay with me, baby. Please." None of the crew made eye contact with him. As they wheeled Eleanor away, one of the passengers shouted, "This is what you caused." Desmond didn't reply. He simply followed the stretcher off the plane, still gripping her hand, cameras flashing around him like it was the red carpet. But this wasn't fame. This wasn't news. This was an old man being dragged through trauma just for refusing to give up a seat he paid for. They said he was non-compliant, a disruption, unruly. But if you saw what I saw, he just sat there, quiet, calm, holding Eleanor's hand. The moment the security officers touched Desmond's shoulders, Eleanor's demeanor shifted. Her face, once filled with confusion, now reflected fear. Real fear. The kind that tightens in the chest and drains color from the lips. Her eyes darted between her husband and the men in uniform like she couldn't believe this was happening. Not again. Not here. Not now. "Don't you dare put your hands on my husband," she cried out, her voice shaking with something deeper than panic. The lead flight attendant turned away, pretending not to hear. Desmond was guided down the narrow aisle, slowly and without resistance, but every step felt like a betrayal. Not of the crew, not of the airline, but of his own dignity. He had spent his entire career keeping people alive, serving with grace, paying his taxes, shaking the hands of mayors and senators. And now here he was, treated like an inconvenience, a problem to be removed. Eleanor remained seated, breathing hard. Her hands trembled. A fellow passenger reached out to ask if she was okay, but she waved them off. "I just need my husband," she whispered. Seconds later, she clutched her chest. Her back arched. A dry gasp escaped her throat. Her eyes rolled upward, and her body dropped forward like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Gasps rippled across the cabin. "She's down. She's not breathing. Someone call for help." The same attendants who had stood so firm minutes earlier now scrambled. One fumbled with the overhead compartment, yanking down the emergency kit. Another ran to the intercom to summon a doctor, any doctor on board. A passenger with medical training rushed over. "She's having a cardiac event. Get oxygen now." The mask was clamped to her face, her chest rising and falling erratically. Desmond, hearing the noise from outside the cabin doors, broke past the officers holding him and ran toward her. "No, no, no, that's my wife," he screamed. Nobody stopped him this time. They couldn't. The chaos was too loud. He collapsed at her side, whispering her name over and over, brushing the sweat from her forehead. Eleanor, baby, look at me. Just blink. Just squeeze my hand. Nothing. The plane was grounded. The pilot announced an emergency return to gate over the intercom. The flight was officially canceled. Outside the plane, paramedics arrived within minutes. Inside, time had stopped. Eleanor was lifted onto a stretcher, an IV already running. Desmond never let go of her hand. As they rolled her down the aisle, passengers recorded silently. Some cried, some cursed under their breath. But no one looked the crew in the eye. In the background, the younger white couple that had been offered the seat stood frozen, clutching their designer carry-ons, wide-eyed and visibly shaken. Desmond followed Eleanor down the jet bridge, not even noticing the flashing cameras or murmurs around him. The security guards didn't try to touch him again. Outside the ambulance, reporters had already begun to arrive. Someone had leaked the footage. The video of Desmond being pulled away, Eleanor collapsing, the shouts, the cries, it was already making rounds online. One reporter shouted, "Sir, did they cause your wife's collapse?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the back doors of the ambulance, fists clenched, breathing unevenly. Then slowly, without looking back, he pulled out his phone. He scrolled through the contacts. His hand trembled as he tapped. Desmond didn't speak to the press that night. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He sat by Eleanor's hospital bed, in a cold room lit by too many machines, listening to the beeping, her breathing, and the sound of wheels rolling past the hallway every few minutes. His suit was still wrinkled from the plane. The blood pressure cuff around her arm inflated every 15 minutes, with a hiss that felt louder than thunder. She had suffered a stress-induced cardiac episode. That's what the doctors said. A massive surge of adrenaline, emotional trauma, not uncommon in elderly patients, they told him. But Desmond already knew. He didn't need the chart. He had seen the exact same thing happen to patients who'd buried their sons or lost everything overnight. It was grief. Raw, sudden, weaponized grief. A nurse came in and adjusted her IV. Desmond didn't look up. He just held Eleanor's hand and stared at her face, half-shadowed, motionless, her mouth slightly parted. He whispered gently, "You're still here. Stay here." At 4:07 a.m., he finally stood up, stepped into the hallway, and made a call. The man who answered on the third ring hadn't heard from Desmond in years. "Ray, it happened," Desmond said. "It finally happened. Where are you?" "St. Mercy, Chicago, ICU. Who?" "American Flight 244. Eleanor collapsed. They dragged me off the plane." Silence. "Do you want press or lawsuits?" Desmond didn't hesitate. "Both." The man on the other end was Miles Carter, former classmate, now one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the country. Media savvy, ruthless in court, and loyal to a fault when it came to Desmond. "I'll be there by noon," Miles said, "and I'll bring everything." By sunrise, the video had already gone viral. A woman on board had posted the clip to social media with the caption, "They forced this old man off the plane. His wife had a heart attack minutes later. Is this the America we're in now?" 6 hours in, the footage had been viewed 2 million times. By mid-morning, national news stations were picking it up. Racial discrimination on Flight 244. Cardiologist removed from seat, wife hospitalized. Witnesses say airline staff targeted elderly black couple. A hashtag exploded, "Justice for Eleanor." Comment sections were flooded. "She looks so scared. I've flown first class with my husband. Never got asked to move. This is racial profiling, period. They need to sue them into the ground." American Airlines issued a statement by noon. "We regret the unfortunate medical emergency that occurred on Flight 244. At this time, we are conducting an internal review to understand the situation fully and have extended our deepest sympathies to the affected parties." Desmond read it twice, lips pressed tight. They didn't mention his name. They didn't admit fault. They called it a medical emergency, not a crisis they helped cause. By 2 p.m., he was sitting across from Miles Carter in the hospital conference room. Carter had already assembled a team, including a media strategist, a junior associate, and a legal investigator who specialized in airline discrimination cases. "They think you'll take a settlement," Miles said. "They're already preparing to offer one." Desmond looked toward Eleanor's room. "I don't want their money. I want their silence broken." "Good," Miles said. "Because they're not just offering cash. They want an NDA and a public statement from you clearing them of any wrongdoing. That's how scared they are." Desmond chuckled bitterly. "So they want me to apologize for being assaulted? Pretty much." Desmond leaned back in the chair. "Then let's make them regret asking." The next 48 hours moved quickly. Witnesses began coming forward. 2 passengers reached out to say they'd overheard the attendants joking before boarding that some people think a first-class ticket makes them royalty. One even provided a screenshot of a text sent mid-flight. "They're dragging this old black dude off. No idea why." Desmond's medical credentials became public knowledge. He wasn't just some angry passenger. He was a decorated doctor, respected by thousands. His hospital released a statement of support. So did the local union. So did several black physicians' associations. The airline's stock began to dip. Behind closed doors, executives panicked. They didn't know they had just targeted the wrong man. The kind who didn't buckle, who didn't take a check and disappear. Desmond's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an internal contact. Someone who worked in airline compliance. The message was short. "There's a video. From the gate. You'll want to see it before they delete it." Desmond stared at the screen for a long time, then handed it to Miles. "No settlement," he said quietly. "Not now, not ever." The lawsuit landed 3 days later. Not a warning letter, not a request for an apology. A full civil suit filed in federal court, citing racial discrimination, emotional distress, and reckless endangerment. The media had already dubbed it the first-class incident. But for Desmond, it wasn't about media spins or catchy headlines. It was about accountability. The airline responded publicly, claiming they were disappointed by the legal action and confident in their crew's professionalism. But behind the scenes, their legal team was scrambling. They hadn't expected this level of resistance. Most people walked away after a check. Desmond wasn't most people. The case gained traction fast. Civil rights organizations joined as Amishi. A prominent senator tweeted her support, demanding a congressional hearing into discriminatory practices in commercial aviation. The airline's PR department tried to fight back with softened statements and vague commitments to equity training. But nothing landed. Not anymore. And then the gate footage surfaced. It was leaked anonymously to a journalist at a major outlet and aired during prime time. A high-resolution video showing Desmond and Eleanor calmly approaching the gate, handing over their passports, smiling. The agent's demeanor, her double take when reading their names, the sideways glance to her colleague, it was all there. No aggression. No confusion. Just discomfort on the staff's part the moment they realized who had been seated in first class. The next clip showed 2 flight attendants huddled in the corner of the jet bridge, whispering. One of them pointed toward the boarding door and said, "Clear as day. I don't care what his title is, they don't look like they belong up there." The internet caught fire. "They don't look like they belong." 6 words that spread like a match to dry grass. Desmond didn't watch the footage more than once. He didn't need to. He'd heard those words in one form or another since he was a boy. He didn't sleep much that week. Not because of the lawsuit, not because of the press, but because Eleanor still hadn't woken up. Her condition was stable, but she hadn't spoken. Doctors remained cautious. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Protesters marched through terminals. Former airline employees came forward, anonymously at first, then publicly. One ex-flight attendant posted a TikTok saying, "We were trained to be polite, but we were also trained to manage the brand image. That meant if someone didn't fit the look of first class, we were encouraged to find a reason to move them." I watched it happen more than once, and usually it wasn't someone white. Desmond's legal team gathered testimonies, patterns, policies, records of similar complaints swept under the rug. The case was no longer just about him and Eleanor. It was a spotlight, unforgiving, overdue, and growing hotter by the day. And while the airline doubled down in boardrooms, Desmond stayed exactly where he needed to be, by Eleanor's side, waiting for her to open her eyes. By the time the pretrial hearing began, it wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a movement. The courtroom was packed. Civil rights lawyers, former airline employees, reporters, protesters gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Accountability at 30,000 feet, and first class doesn't mean second-class treatment." The energy was different now. Focused. Unforgiving. Desmond sat in the front row, his back straight, dressed in a tailored dark suit, face unreadable. He didn't flinch when the airline's lawyers argued that the crew had acted within protocol and had no intention of racial bias. He didn't look away when they claimed that removing him from the flight was a safety precaution. But when the defense attorney said Eleanor's collapse was a tragic but unrelated medical event, something in Desmond's jaw shifted. The judge asked for evidence. That's when the real damage began. Exhibit after exhibit painted a damning picture. A database of passenger complaints showing a disproportionate number of black and brown travelers removed from first class or bumped to coach. Internal emails recovered during discovery in which senior staff exchanged jokes about profiling passengers who don't fit the brand. One email from a regional manager read, "Keep first class looking like first class. Don't be afraid to shuffle seats if the optics are off." Then came the testimonies. A former crew member took the stand anonymously. Her voice altered. "We were told that if a black or Latino couple seemed out of place in first, we should find a way to make them move. It was never written in a manual, but it was spoken, repeated, expected." Another ex-employee wasn't afraid to show her face. "I left the company because I couldn't keep pretending. I saw a black father and daughter humiliated on a flight last year. The pattern is real. It's not isolated." Desmond listened, silent, still. But inside, a storm raged. The airline's attorneys tried to redirect, insisting these were individual misjudgments, not a systemic issue. But by then, the narrative had broken past their control. The public had seen the gate footage, heard the testimonies, watched the statistics pile up. Eleanor remained unconscious through the first week of hearings. Desmond visited her every evening after court, reading to her from the Bible, holding her hand. Each morning, he returned to court with a new layer of steel behind his eyes. In a powerful moment, the judge requested to view the full gate and cabin footage in open court. The room watched in silence as the screen showed the entire sequence. Eleanor's gentle smile, Desmond's calm refusal, the white couple waiting, the attendants huddling, the order to move them, Desmond's removal, Eleanor's collapse. By the end, even the judge seemed rattled. "This is no longer about company policy," she said, turning to the airline's lawyers. "It's about the consequences of treating dignity as negotiable." Public support swelled. Airline stock dropped another 6%. Several executives went quiet on social media. Sponsors started backing away from corporate partnerships. For Desmond, none of that mattered yet. All he wanted, more than a ruling, more than revenge, was for Eleanor to open her eyes. And for the system that allowed this to happen to be dragged into the daylight, exposed for what it was. Not broken, but designed that way. 10 days after the incident, Eleanor Wilson opened her eyes. The nurse called Desmond before the machines finished registering the change. He rushed into the ICU, heart in his throat, expecting disappointment again. But this time, she was awake. Groggy, disoriented, but alive. Her fingers curled slowly around his, and her eyes filled with tears before she could speak a word. Desmond didn't cry, not in front of her. He just held her hand and whispered, "You scared me, baby, but you stayed. Thank you." It was the first real moment of peace he'd felt since that plane. The news reached the courtroom within hours. That same day, Eleanor's hospital bed became the stage for a seismic video statement. A small camera, one mic, no makeup, no press team, just her, tired and pale, looking straight into the lens. "I am not here to be pitied. I am not your headline. I am not your unfortunate event. I am a woman, a wife, and I was treated like I didn't matter. But I do. And so do all the people who've been treated the same way, quietly, without a camera." The video was posted online by Desmond's legal team. It didn't need editing. It didn't need music. It hit 1 million views in under 12 hours. Eleanor's words weren't fiery. They weren't performative. They were heavy with the quiet authority of someone who had lived through too many near-invisible injustices. Her story began opening doors. Within weeks, the Department of Transportation launched a formal review into discriminatory airline practices. Civil rights groups held press briefings in 3 major airports. A coalition of black physicians called for travel equity legislation, citing the Wilson case as a national example of how systemic racism operates in respectable spaces. Desmond, meanwhile, began sketching something new on a yellow legal pad at Eleanor's bedside, a foundation, Wings of Dignity, dedicated to documenting racial discrimination in air travel and advocating for federal-level reform. He didn't want it to be just about lawsuits. He wanted education, policy change, a way to turn private humiliation into public impact. Donations began pouring in, $10 here, $100 there. One anonymous check came in for $50,000. And then came the call from Congress. Desmond was invited to testify at a public hearing about airline conduct and racial profiling. He went, not in anger, but in clarity. He brought Eleanor's oxygen tank, her nurse, her silence. He told the story, not just of the flight, but of everything before it. The decades of restraint, the rooms he was ignored in, the subtle cuts that had built to this very moment. They thought they were silencing two elderly passengers, but all they did was amplify them, and with every voice that joined theirs, it became clearer. This wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was a legacy taking shape. The courtroom wasn't the only place things were unraveling. In boardrooms across the country, especially inside the headquarters of the airline responsible, something far more unsettling had begun to grow. Fear. The video of Eleanor's hospital statement had gone viral, yes. But what followed shook corporate circles in a way no press release could fix. Travel blogs pulled together years' worth of data showing how Black passengers were disproportionately removed from flights or denied upgrades. A whistleblower leaked a series of internal audit reports revealing complaints that had been intentionally buried, some dating back over a decade. An airline executive was quoted off the record saying, "If one more thing leaks, we're finished." But more did. Former pilots spoke out. An ex-regional manager stepped forward with training slides that never made it to the official onboarding materials. One slide read, "First impressions matter. Keep premium cabin presentation consistent with brand image." And beneath it, stock photos of only white passengers. The image was damning. But worse than that, it was intentional. Airline investors began pulling out. Partner companies canceled joint ad campaigns. Members of Congress, seeing how quickly the public mood was shifting, called for a public inquiry into discrimination in domestic air travel. The CEO of the airline was asked to testify. He declined. Desmond and Eleanor watched the hearings from home, sitting side by side on their couch. She still needed assistance to walk, and her voice remained soft. But when they showed the gate footage on national television, Eleanor whispered, "They never even looked at us like we were human." Desmond replied, "But now the whole world is looking." The airline tried to salvage what it could. They announced a rebranding effort, new training programs, leadership changes, and a multi-million-dollar fund to support inclusive travel initiatives. But no one was moved. Public trust had shattered. It wasn't just about Desmond and Eleanor anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told to step aside, sit in the back, or wait their turn, even when they'd paid for the front row. A group of passengers who'd been on Flight 244 formed their own coalition. They wrote an open letter, published in a national paper. "We saw what happened, we saw who they targeted, and we saw how they responded only after cameras started rolling. That flight changed us. It showed us what too many people live with every day." The airline responded with silence. Their legal team had gone quiet. Settlement talks were off the table. Desmond made sure of that. For the first time in years, it wasn't a matter of if a corporation would pay for its bias, but how much. Eleanor's voice was weak but clear when she said, "We never wanted this fight." Desmond nodded. "But maybe we were always meant to be in it." And the pressure? It was just beginning. It took 4 months, 2 hearings, and a wave of public outrage before the airline formally admitted wrongdoing. Not through a press release, not buried in legal jargon, but on live television during a Federal Transportation Committee hearing. One of their senior executives, red-eyed and hesitant, looked into the camera and said, "We failed them, we failed the Wilsons, and we failed every passenger who trusted us to treat them with basic humanity." Desmond didn't smile. Eleanor didn't clap. There was no victory lap, because accountability was never supposed to take this long, or this much suffering, to arrive. They didn't fight for applause. They fought for truth. In the months that followed, the FAA introduced new guidelines requiring anti-bias certification for all commercial flight crews. Airline staff now had to complete cultural competency programs, with real consequences for failing to comply. Passengers began to notice the change. Quiet, small differences, fewer assumptions, fewer sideways glances, less entitlement floating through the air like smog. Wings of Dignity expanded its operations to cover all transportation sectors: buses, trains, cruise lines. Eleanor, now recovering steadily, gave interviews from their living room. She wasn't the most eloquent speaker, but people listened anyway. Her voice shook, but it carried something no speech could replicate: experience. A teacher from Atlanta wrote to them, "What you went through, I've been through it too. I just never had the strength to speak. Now I do." Another message came from a Black teenage boy in New Jersey. "I showed your story to my history class. You made me feel like I'm not crazy, like this really is happening." And then one from a white flight attendant. "Your case changed how I see people, how I do my job, thank you." Desmond never sought to be anyone's hero, but he became a symbol, a living, breathing example of what happens when someone refuses to give in, even when the system is stacked high against them. Even when silence is safer. He often returned to the hospital chapel where he had once prayed for Eleanor's life. Not with bitterness, but with quiet resolve. Each time, he lit a candle and said the same words: "We're still here." Now, as you sit with this story, ask yourself, what would you have done on that flight? Would you have spoken up? Looked away? Pulled out your phone? It's not just about race, it's about power, access, respect. The kind of world we allow to exist in the spaces between what's said out loud and what's tolerated in silence. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Don't let it be just another headline. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. We see you, we hear you, and your voice matters. Subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for more real stories that challenge, inspire, and refuse to be forgotten.